So my name's Dave Millard. I'm a professor of computer science at Southampton.
I'm so sorry, as I always do, I have to
Yep.
interrupt you. Presentations are generally 5 minutes, remember? And Anne is the waiver, and then after that,
5
10-minute
minutes.
discussion.
Wow. All right. I'll do my best.
That didn't count.
That didn't count. Well, let me finish my little story first. So I'm one of FoT supervisors at the university, and I noticed that David Aurora in the corner was one of my internal examiners for my PhD. So that makes him sort of grandfatherly figure.
Hello, grandfather.
There you go. These connections. Okay, so yeah, apologies. A few of you saw a longer version of this presentation at Hypertext, but I thought it was relevant here. This is a paper that Mark and I wrote to try and address this question of what is hypertext and what is it in today's world. And our motivation was that we noticed that a lot of people think about hypertext as a historical technology, right? So something that is perhaps in the 80s and 90s, and we've moved on, and now we're looking at other things. And in the ACM Hypertext conference, this question of, well, what is hypertext anyway, and what is its relevance, has come up time and time again. So in '99, Mark Bernstein asked, where are the hypertexts? 2003, Pete Nurnberg did a keynote called What is Hypertext? And Noah Wardrop-Frun in 2004 presented a paper which was What Hypertext Is, where he was complaining about what Pete said, what is hypertext? The general consensus is it's something to do with links and linking. But Mark and I took a different approach. We look back through the literature and we try to identify traditions of talking about hypertext and try to understand what were the commonalities, right, and what the themes were and what might link these different things together. We came up with 7 different contexts, and I'll let Mark touch on those later. But I wanted to start off with the punchline, which I think is kind of most relevant to this community. And I'm going to talk about that through a little story about Jean-Paul Sartre and SharePoint, if you'll indulge me for a moment. So for those of you who don't know, Jean-Paul Sartre was a French playwright and philosopher, very much associated with the philosophy of existentialism. And existentialism, my slides have broken slightly on your performance. Sorry. But existentialism is essentially associated with this idea of existence precedes essence. In other words, we're not born into a world where we have a purpose and we have a meaning and there is a set of rules we must follow, but rather we must build those things in the world ourselves, right? Very often it's associated with a sort of more atheistic position, but that isn't necessarily the case. If you have an ideology, if you have a set of rules that you're following, the point of existentialism is that you should critically engage with those and think about what those rules mean in your modern life and your modern context. And people like Jean-Paul Sartre were therefore fascinated by the idea of what does it mean to live a good life, right? If there's no predefined purpose, if we must build it ourselves, what does that mean? And the answer to them was exactly this point about critical engagement. So they called this being authentic. So essentially, if you were engaged in this process of constructing this meaning and thinking critically, you were leading an authentic life. Whereas on the other hand, if you were kind of drifting through life without engaging in that thought, then you were living in bad faith. And that brings me back to SharePoint. So as I said, I'm at the University of Southampton. Southampton uses SharePoint for its information infrastructure. And I'm not a big fan of SharePoint. I don't like the way that it makes me structure files. I don't like the fact that I can't link between things easily or tag things easily. I can't share things in the way I particularly want to share them, despite the name. SharePoint, for me in my digital life, is an example of bad faith, right? So the question is, what technology enables me to live an authentic digital life, right? And I think the clue is probably in the title. The answer for me is hypertext lets me live an authentic digital life. Hypertext is a mechanism that enables us to engage with our information, build the structures and rules, and think the way we want to think. It's an empowering technology. Ted Nelson, nearly 50 years ago now, said you can and must understand computers now, right? And that's because he was very clear that this would define the way we communicated and the way that we thought, right? So taking control of it and taking ownership of it was really of the utmost importance. So how does hypertext enable us to do that? Well, it is to do with linking, but it's what you do with those links. It's the fact that you can then use those links to construct other structures to engage in the way that you want to engage. Now, SharePoint gives me hierarchies, which is fine, but there are other things I might want to do. And hypertextual technologies enable us to engage with information in the way that we want. Now, I think this comes down to a principle of kind of non-regular structure, effectively. It enables us to be inventive with the structures that we use. So that takes me to my second French philosopher.
I have to change the thing while you talk.
Go for it, which is Derrida. Thank you. Which
They were,
way?
they were looking at the other one.
Oh, you're looking at the other.
Yeah, sharing with our point.
There you are. Is that better?
Yes.
Let's try again. So Derrida is associated with post-structuralism. So structuralism is this idea that we understand the world through kind of grand structures, grand sort of meanings. And the post-structural movement, it doesn't abandon structure completely. It just says there are alternative structures. There are different ways of looking at the world, different structures you can engage. And Derrida said that if we enable this, if we say you can take a position and think about the world in these different ways, it allows you to engage in what he called jeu libre, or free play, right? So I think essentially what we're saying about hypertext is it's a set of technologies that enable us to use non-regular structure to build meaning in our informational lives and engage in those, and engage in free play in our digital information systems. That's what hypertext is about. And when Mark and I looked at the kind of literature and we saw these traditions of hypertext, we essentially see this philosophy applied to different areas of life. So to knowledge, to learning, to software, to interactions, creativity, sociality, and play, essentially. And it manifests in different ways. And I think what we have in the sort of extended reality space is a new space in which we can take that philosophy and that idea and try to apply it. So some people have called this hypertext as method, the idea that hypertext is a way of thinking about the world that you can apply in different spaces. Now, I've probably left Mark about 1 minute to say a little bit.
Well, you run the exciting parts.
I have run the exciting part. Shall I just finish up?
Why not?
Or do you wanna-
I think it's good.
So I'm not going to go through these areas in detail. I don't have time, but if you're interested, we can point you at where the paper is. But essentially, there's a long history of systems that engage with knowledge and learning, systems which look at hypertext as a sort of software infrastructure. You were talking about interactions, so different types of interactions, and of course in the more kind of social and creative spaces, how hypertext manifests in those kinds of ways. I'm very struck that we actually see what's sometimes been called feral hypertext in the wild. We've had this explosion in the Web 2 era, but we see a similar explosion today. So we see people talking about human in the loop for AI. We see a new generation of personal knowledge management tools and systems. We see AR and VR and people exploring what it means in those kinds of contexts, this kind of new canvas that Frode was talking about. So we clearly are at a point where there's an opportunity to take this hypertextual thinking and apply it in a new space. At the same time, there are things that have been left behind. So hypertext is not just about links and link following and those kinds of structures, but more ambiguous structures like spatial hypertext, spatial hypermedia. There's this whole idea about how it interacts with artificial intelligence or adaptive hypermedia, how it manifests in hypertext literature and games. And this idea of, hypertext doesn't kill people, but people kill people. We have problems in our hypertextual spaces. So we have social problems, we have problems around kind of bad actors and how we defend our technologies and defend ourselves in those spaces. And those are things that we have yet to apply in these kind of new areas. So in conclusion to this idea about what is hypertext, I would say that in our kind of survey, we really see that hypertext is a mindset, right? Rich with virality, by which I mean we're not the only ones talking about this, but there are people out there in the world actively pursuing this, and you see it manifesting in many different domains, in many different spaces. So hypertext is very much alive, very much still has things to say, still has lessons for us all to learn. And I think the question for this community is we can see some of these connections that others can't. So how do we reach across the divide, help people make those connections and kind of learn from our shared history? Thank you very much. That's probably more than 5 minutes. But apologies.
couple of minutes. We skipped the ICM and the papers are still free access on.
Oh, still, okay. So apparently the paper is free access on the ACM portal if anyone is interested.
Any questions?
Do you think?
Oh, sorry. You have to speak really loudly because otherwise the online can't hear you.
Okay, so my question is, thank you for it, first of all. My question is, do you think that hypertext is a hypermedia or a form of hypermedia? In other words, is hypermedia in hypertext and is hypertext in hypermedia? I hope that makes sense, but
I think so.
I wonder a bit that, and this will also be later in my presentation, a sort of question I have is that it's a bit confusing. If you look at this hypermedia, which was added later, whether, yeah, it's a bit confusing what came first and is this separation even a good separation?
Yeah. So I guess the quick and trivial answer is that generally I think people in that space don't make a distinction at all, and they use the two words completely interchangeably. So when I'm talking about hypertext, I am talking about hypermedia. The very, very early systems were purely textual, but that's probably a limitation of the technology of the day. But yes, I think, you know, quite clearly it doesn't have to be textual. It's about information presented in whatever form. I think you sort of suggested reducing it down to sort of symbolic logics, I think, and it's just you know, information that is presented in a form that's suitable for people. So perhaps that's the way to think about it. It's kind of information for people. You know, goes back to Doug's ideas of augmenting sort of human intellect. Sorry, you're it looks like you're the runner for.
Oh.
Ah.
Oh, okay, yeah, feel free to speak. Oh, I can't see who you are, but hang on.
Hi, Brendel.
I'll go on.
You may speak.
Hey there. Thank you. So great paper. Really exciting to use this as a frame of reference. My question is, obviously, you know, just presenting these lenses as a descriptive sort of mechanism to characterize the disparate uses of hypertext is an important kind of foundational work. One of the questions I have, is about the utility of editors and authoring as applied to these lenses. You know, one of the challenges that sort of besets word processing is that when a word processor fails to clarify and specialize its function for anything beyond the idea that, well, it's just words, you know, you just need a word editor for words, is that you can't have further opinions about what those words are for, and so you can't refine the sort of the function of it. When you take this lens and see people sort of making use of the sort of nominal hypertext authoring environments that exist today, do you see frictions and fluidities that apply when people are sort of using and alternately misusing the tools in terms of what the specific authoring environment believes is its primary function? Like, is that, like, as a next step, like when applying this lens, like, does it help tell you what should be included and excluded in a given authoring environment?
So this is why we need to repeat the questions, by the way, if we're getting an online one, because nobody could hear any of that, right? Okay.
So the question was about authoring environments and about what does this lens tell you about the challenges that you face in different authoring environments for different domains. So I'm guessing actually you have something to say about this because you've been involved in sort of hypertext authoring and maintenance for a long time. So I'll hand over to you in a second. I think that there's I think what it tells you is that first of all, that there are different domains and different ways of thinking about it and different ways in which you might want to support people in different spaces, but also that there are probably common challenges that come up, and that the solutions to those challenges might then manifest in different ways. I know Mark has been involved in hypertext authoring, hypertext, looking after large-scale hypertext for a while. So you have something to say about those spaces.
I think as has been said, we've taken the view that although we've sort of given various aspects of hypertext, they're really to, as much as anything, to help those without familiarity with the field see what it is. I don't think I think it's difficult for the tools themselves to have too much opinion. I mean, I very much come to see hypertext just as a way of thought, and I think it's probably a non-normative human behavior. A lot of people actually generally crave more rigidity and more structure, and hypertext is innately more freewheeling, but it's definitely not a binary point. But I think most people probably are less comfortable with hypertext than those who do it a lot. You raise a very good point, and one of the things when I'm sort of helping people with hypertext tools is explain to them that, in a sense, they need to be sort of present in the authoring process. So it's not a matter of the tool telling you what to do. We're educated to use, especially software tools, in the manner that the manual prescribes, which is unhelpful for this sort of exploratory and very interconnected work. And it's problematic too. And you can sort of see we're going through a new loop of it with AI at the moment, where you have a magic 8-ball that tells you what the supposed answer is, when really what you were trying to do is ask a nuanced question, and you wanted to know a range of the things that were there so that you could then better employ your knowledge. I don't think the rules are set here. I think you're raising very good points. And what that really speaks to is that those building tools want to leave space for this sort of exploration. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a thing that, just writes that short list or does your shopping list or something. But that's a rather different sort of word editing, text editing tool. So it's definitely another case that, in terms of editing text and things, it's not a one size fits all. And I'd also just throw in a slight link to something that, when I think about where spatial hypertext has been and where it might go, I very much think of tools like Yuli's, it's SoftSpace, I think, if I get the name right. That's very much where I think the extra environment of AR and VR can help. It's basic extended thinking space and freed from the linearity of the faux paper page. I'm not sure if that's answered the question.
So I was just something to add to that. So one of the useful things about associating hypertext in its broadest sense with, say, existentialism is it lets you think about some of the criticisms that were leveled against existentialism, and they're therefore relevant criticisms for us. So one of those criticisms is this sort of, it's a very frightening idea, right? The idea that actually there isn't a predefined way of working, that you in the case of the philosophy, through life, right, and that it's something you have to build yourself. And it's daunting and difficult for people.
Sorry, Dave.
So I think
I'm just
some of the
going over time, but
Yep.
please keep talking. I'm just
So-
going to get the next one ready.
So I think one of the challenges we have is dealing with that, and how we help people cope with that freedom, and cope with that liberty that the technology offers them. And some people do find that off-putting and find it difficult.
Sorry.
It's all right. Is there any other questions on the reasons?
There's a question over there.
Yeah, it's a call from the cool kids. Yes.
Okay, something there. Okay.
They need to be close to that mic too, I guess, for the online audience.
Yeah, that's good.
It made me wonder about, so my bias is VR, XR, and when we switch from hypertext to hypermedia, I was thinking, when we have a virtual world and interacting in that virtual world, we can transclude another virtual world in it, so have like a small version of it. So it does apply directly today to going and reaching through virtual worlds one to another, transcluding different 3D environment, content, and even people in it. And I just never thought about transclusion in XR before, but that still makes sense, like with the latest.
Any final questions? Because
Well, just to comment on that. So
sorry, David, a little bit closer to this. You're being
I'll come and sit down. So I was going to say my current research area is mixed reality systems. Actually, it's something that I started with Dave back in the Equator project back in the early 2000s. And when we first came to mixed reality systems, we were hypertext people. We had a history of doing hypertext work. So it's that old adage, to someone with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So to us, people said, mixed reality. And we said, well, that's just physical hypertext, right? Literally, it's information overlaid, not over textual documents or video or images, but just overlaid over physical environments or virtual environments or vice versa. So yeah, so I think it's a way of thinking. You can apply it. It's not the only way of thinking about those environments, but it gives you some advantages. And one of the things it's done for us is it's highlighted some of the limitations and deficiencies of current XR systems because they don't take those relationships that far. And what you were saying is an example of how you would push it, worlds within worlds, layers upon layers. Thank you.
One of the things that I thought was great about your paper that I really want to highlight for everybody is that hypertext as a tool for thoughts and hypertext as a tool for presentation, it's not the same thing, which is why it's easy to make this amazing thing while you're thinking. And then when someone looks at it, it's a complete mess. It's the whole point. So that was a huge liberating thing. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Then we can be a bit louder in this room. Come on.
Right.
You missed the Doug Engelbart thing. Prize.
Yes.
I have to make sure that prize. They'd get a prize.
But named after who?
Everybody can still hear everything fine online, right? Brandel, I can see your head, so if you nod, I know everybody's happy. Okay, over to you, Niana.
Thanks. Do you want me to hold that? Or no. Okay.
Please.
I
didn't take away this horrible coffee.
No worries.